You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Packers Talk.
You're listening to No Huddle Radio on the Packers Talk Radio Network, your home for in-depth and thoughtful Packers analysis. I'm your host, Gil Martin. My co-host is my good friend, Sean Tehan. In addition to this show, I write for the Packers Post and Cheesehead TV, and Sean was a TV sportscaster in Minnesota. We're here to talk Packers because you're all here for one thing, and that's a love for Green Bay football. Sean, we are closing in on the final preseason game and then cuts. This is an exciting time of year for the Green Bay Packers.
Oh, yeah, it's a very exciting time of year, and it's also a very exciting time for if you're looking to go to a Packer football game. And a few words about our own sponsor, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packer fans. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com. You can see the link right there on your screen if you're watching with us on YouTube today, or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. For direct links to specific Packers game tickets, go to packerstalk.com/tickets or browse their website at theticketking.com. And again, you can see that link right on your screen if you're watching with us on YouTube. If you're following on Facebook, we appreciate you. Subscribe, tell your friends, tell your family, your enemies, your kids, your grandkids, whoever, just tell everyone about us. We're here and we're ready for Packer football.
We are always ready for Packer football. And let's start with the mess that was last Sunday in Denver, because that was difficult to watch, to say the least. Now, the good news is obviously more than 30 players did not participate in the game at all. I would have to say both the offense and the defense were as vanilla as they could possibly be. I don't even think there were major adjustments made in game. It was just like, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it. But boy, that was hard to watch.
It sure was, where supposedly reports from those who had boots on the ground essentially said Friday's practice, joint practice with the Denver Broncos, was not very clean. Seemed like the Broncos got the best out of the Packers. And then Sunday, if the practice was as bad as that, I can't imagine it, because it was 27-2. It was pretty ugly. There were questions that we wanted answered that didn't get answered. We didn't really get a good showing of Sean Clifford or Michael Pratt, for two guys auditioning for that backup quarterback job. We wanted to see maybe a little more Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph in the kicking game. We saw one field goal attempt. That was from Greg Joseph, and it sailed wide right in a hurry. The only good thing that I could say that came out of that game, Gil, was it like you said, 31 players were not playing, did not suit up. A lot of the starters, a lot of the roster locks did not play. It was a good game if you're a member of the front office of the Green Bay Packers, if you're Brian Gutekunst, where you had a lot of tape that you could sift through. And if you're trying to think between one player or another who's going to get the final roster spot or two, that was some good tape to evaluate, to have a better idea of who's going to make this initial 53-man roster and who may be sitting on your practice squad or who may not be on the team in general after a couple weeks from now.
Yeah, the problem is that it's not good tape. I mean, it's important tape. It's vital tape. But I think you can count the number of players who looked good in that game on the fingers of one hand.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very slim to none. Zach Morton, obviously, he had the sack of Zach Wilson and for the safety in that game, where it was a very nice play by Zach Morton. Christian Welch, the Iola, Wisconsin native, who's in his second year with the Packers, had an interception that was off a deflected pass at the line of scrimmage. Brenton Cox Jr. showed some flashes out there as well. Outside of that, though, not a lot of good things. I will say this, though. The offensive line, obviously not ideal, but Andre Dillard played pretty well. And he's a guy who we've been pretty critical of from training camp early on, where he struggled mightily last year with the Tennessee Titans. He was a former first-round pick of the Philadelphia Eagles, has all the athletic traits to be a really good football player, just hasn't really put together. And it seems like he's kind of putting things together right now. That's kind of a positive, where Andre Dillard looked like he was definitely going to be cut after the first couple of weeks of training camp, but he's really played well in 2 preseason games.
Well, here's the thing about Dillard that I've noticed. He seems to do a lot better on the left side than he does on the right side.
Yeah.
And if he's going to be your swing tackle, it's almost like, well, he better be filling in on the left, because he's vulnerable and just, less adept and coordinated on the right side. So, maybe he's your backup left tackle, but you try something else. Maybe you move Elton Jenkins out to right tackle if something happens to Zach Tom. There's a lot of possible combinations because the Packers always emphasize versatility along the offensive line. But yeah, Dillard did look better. That is extremely important and extremely refreshing. And, he just might make this team after all, where a couple of weeks ago he looked like a lock to be cut.
Yeah, and I'll give Andre Dillard this, where a lot of people may think, oh, you're an offensive tackle. You should be able to play left side or right side if you're in the pros. It's like what Billy Turner said a few years ago when he used to be with the Packers. When you're shifted from one side to another, it's like trying to wipe your butt with your opposite hand. And it's true, where it's especially along the offensive line, where your first step, your inside step is, if you're on the right side, your inside step is your left foot. If you're on the left side, your inside step is your right foot. Those dynamics change. Your instep is the opposite foot. Everything is just opposite. And it's totally different. And that is probably the best analogy. Literally, it's like wiping your behind with your other hand. So for Andre Dillard, where left tackle, obviously, he's a little more comfortable at. Right tackle may not be so much the case. So you better hope Zach Tom stays healthy, or you have another guy who can play right tackle. Maybe Jordan Morgan, if he's the right guard and he slides over to right tackle. It's the same footwork. It's just a little different position. But Andre Dillard, his play was definitely encouraging on Sunday in Denver.
Yeah, that was one of the bright spots on offense, but they were very much few and far between.
Yeah, and obviously that was the first of two joint practices that the Packers have this offseason during this month. The second one just occurred on Thursday against the Baltimore Ravens, or with the Baltimore Ravens. Packers hosted Baltimore for a joint practice in the comforts of Green Bay, in the comforts in the shadow of Lambeau Field. Baltimore is obviously a great football team. That's a team that had the best record in the NFL a season ago. Probably a team that, if they didn't stink it up so much in the red zone, the AFC Championship last year, they may have been hoisting that Lombardi trophy a season ago. It's a very good team, a very good test for the Packers. And it sounds like, Gil, from Thursday's joint practice with Baltimore, it sounds like it was a lot better than what we saw or what we heard from their joint practice in Denver last week.
Yeah, and that was certainly encouraging. And, you needed a better performance than what they got a week ago. And I guess, to me, one of the encouraging things after the practice is over, Jordan Love meets with the media and basically says, and I quote, "I feel like the team as a whole, we're definitely ready." And just hearing him say that, it seems like the positivity that kind of evaporated Sunday in Denver has returned.
Jordan Love is, you can pretty much call him Joe Cool, because he's always the same. He's always cool, calm, and collected. And he's the leader of this team. The quarterback just is always the guy that everyone's going to look to when times are tough or times are good, whatever it may be. He's the leader, and he's always calm, cool, and collected no matter what. It could be the worst day of his life. It could be the best day of his life. It could be the best practice, the worst practice. It seems like Jordan Love is always the same mindset. He's the same level-headed mentality, which you really need. You need that calming presence out on the field, in the locker room. And speaking of Jordan Love, it sounded like he was pretty terrific on Thursday. He had 4 touchdown passes supposedly in the red zone. And that was a rough estimate, a practice estimate against really a terrific defense in Baltimore, a defense that is really good year in and year out with guys like Roquan Smith and Marlon Humphrey and Justin Madubuike, who had a monster year on the D-line. And it sounds like also defensively, the Packers' defensive line really got after it against a physical Baltimore front, a Baltimore offensive line and an offensive front that loves to run the football, play smash mouth football. And it's good to hear that the Packers weren't getting punked by a team like the Baltimore Ravens getting physical, albeit in a practice setting, but very encouraging to hear nonetheless.
Yeah, and again, in no way was the poor performance in Denver causing me to panic. I know 31 players didn't suit up. It's preseason. If you ask me in 2 weeks what the score was of that game or how much it mattered, it's not going to matter.
No.
But you still don't want to see that poor effort. So coming back and bouncing back and having a better performance at this joint practice kind of reestablishes the tone that you wanted to have. And I'm going to say this in advance of Saturday's preseason finale. The Ravens are a team that plays to win preseason games.
Yes, they do.
Do not be upset or surprised if the Packers lose this game badly, even though it's at Lambeau Field. We still don't know whether or not starters are going to play, and if so, for how long. But the Ravens play to win, and the Packers may again be playing to look at guys. And we have to keep that in mind before we panic about the possible outcome of Saturday afternoon's game.
And Gil, and I was just about to ask you, do you want to see the starters play on Saturday? Because it sounds like this practice was pretty productive, where I think I'm okay with them not playing, at least Jordan Love not playing on Saturday. Maybe you get some little extra running with the starting defense, but you're 2 weeks away from opening the season in Sao Paulo, Brazil. If Jordan Love feels good about this team, you got to go with that. And if it's as good of a practice as we heard it was today, I'm okay with the starters not playing on Saturday. Obviously, for the fans in attendance, not ideal. You'd obviously want to see number 10 lining up behind center, under center, but I'm okay with the starters not playing on Saturday.
I'm okay with it. I mean, I keep going back and forth. Part of me says, put them out there for one series. Just put them out there for one series. Let them, get their feet wet, if you're using a swimming analogy.
Yeah.
But I don't want any risk. If Thursday's joint practice was so positive, you want to go out and end the training camp / preseason on a positive note. If that's good enough, so be it. But part of me would like to see him out there for just one series.
Hey, as long as we can answer the question who the best 53 guys are going to be in less than a week from now, when the initial 53-man roster is getting set up and settled in place, that's all I care about. Obviously, preseason doesn't really matter. I'm pretty sure you could call me out if I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the New England Patriots team that almost ran the table, went 19-0, didn't win a preseason game. And I'm pretty sure the Lions, who didn't win a game in 2007, won all their preseason games. It goes to show it's the preseason. Take it with a grain of salt. Doesn't really matter. Before we get to, though, we're going to segue into some 53-man roster predictions for the initial Packers 53-man roster. The Packers did make a move that was kind of significant, kind of not significant, but I'd say more so an important move. They designated kicker Alex Hale, an alum of Oklahoma State, but Australian-born. He's been designated as the Packers International Player Pathway Program player. Every team gets one of those. He doesn't count against the Packers practice squad total, but that means that Kenneth Odumegwu, an edge rusher who was previously in the program, was released by the Packers. They can only have one guy in that slot. Now you have a kicker in that spot where he's not going to be taking up one of the practice squad positions, but it's a matter of, hey, maybe they could develop a kicker behind Anders Carlson or Greg Joseph. If things go sideways at the kicking position, you have a guy ready to go who doesn't count against the official practice squad total.
First off, I want to say I'm sad to see Odumegwu go. He really seemed to be enjoying every minute of being a part of this Packers organization, and he seemed to have learned a lot. He did not look out of place in the 2 preseason games so far this year, so I give him a lot of credit, and I'm sorry to see him go. Can I be honest with you here, though, Sean? Am I the only one who feels like putting a kicker in this program is kind of like, it may not be against the letter of the law, but it's against the spirit of the rule? Like, it's like cheating.
But you know what? It's a rule that hasn't been made, and that's – I know. It definitely benefits the Packers. Honestly, I liked having like an edge rusher or maybe like an offensive lineman I would have liked in this role, where a guy you could develop and bring along that doesn't count against your practice squad total and who you can develop behind the scenes. But it's a good loophole that the Packers are examining, because if this benefits them, the NFL, as reactionary as they are, they're gonna change some rules after this if this works out pretty well in the Packers' favor.
And look, the good thing about this is it guarantees that the Packers will have 2 kickers available any given week. So let's assume that either Anders Carlson or Greg Joseph wins the kicking job. If they're struggling, let's say they have 2 bad games in a row, and you think Alex Hale is good enough to give him a go in one game, you just have to activate him for that one game. And he still, doesn't, you have that exemption where he could stay on the practice squad. You could elevate him for up to 3 games. And then the 4th time you got to activate him and put him on the 53. It gives you a little bit more flexibility with regards to your kickers. It's a shrewd move, but it's something about it just feels like it's a little bit, like you said, it's a loophole.
And my understanding, too, where he played at Oklahoma State, so he's played football. Kenneth Odomegwu, the rule was, this was designed for guys like Kenneth Odomegwu who haven't played football or played football in a foreign country and didn't play college football in the States, in America, who get introduced and learn a little more about the game. Where this guy played Oklahoma State, but he was born in Australia, and he's from Australia. So it's definitely a loophole. And, hey, kudos to the Packers for doing this, because this is a sneaky move. They're not breaking any rules. Nope. They're not doing anything wrong, but the NFL is going to adjust. I guarantee you, Gil, if teams complain about this, the NFL is going to be like, oh, no, if they play college football in the States, they can't be a part of this program. Yeah.
I mean, he had good numbers at Oklahoma State. You know, it really is a loophole. I'm glad the Packers figured this out, and I think it will benefit the team having an extra kicker available at all times whenever they need him.
Yeah, it's a nice luxury to have. Also, some other roster moves. Green Bay signed one-year defensive lineman Keontae Shad on Thursday. Shad is actually from Madison, Wisconsin. He played in the USFL for the New Orleans Breakers in 2023, where he registered 7.5 sacks. That was second in the league in 2023. Played for the Houston Roughnecks this past season. So some extra D-line competition to wrap up camp coming up pretty soon. Now we're going to move on, though, because it's we're getting much closer, Gil, to the start of the regular season. Roster cutdowns are coming up, and the Packers, they got to think of who's going to be their initial 53-man roster after Saturday's game. They have until August 27th to get that, and that's the afternoon of August 27th to get that roster down to 53 players and then sign practice squad members after that. Gil, let's start out. Who do you got at the quarterback position?
Well, I think the Packers keep two. I think obviously Jordan Love is a lock. I think Michael Pratt ends up as the backup and they try to stash Sean Clifford on the practice squad. How about you?
So I was going back and forth with this, where if Michael Pratt was just dominating in the preseason, especially if he played super well in that preseason game in Denver, I would have been like, hey, I would have agreed with you. Pratt was going to be the backup quarterback. But Michael Pratt, it's like he's got a good arm, but he throws everything 100 plus miles an hour. And there's no touch to anything. And there's just there's a lot of zingers, and just there's a lot of fine tuning that's needed in this game. Sean Clifford, I think they would keep him as the backup quarterback at this point, because I feel like they're going to be able to put Michael Pratt on the practice squad. And I don't think a team's going to scoop him up. I do think right now, Love and Clifford, this is going to be the initial quarterbacks on the initial 53-man roster, but that backup spot could change in the next couple of weeks, depending on what happens around the league and what else happens with other roster cuts around the league. It's kind of similar to when B.J. Coleman was the second string quarterback coming out of camp years ago behind Aaron Rodgers. B.J. Coleman wasn't on the 53-man roster for more than a week. They found someone else to be the backup, and they moved on. So that's where I'm at. I think Sean Clifford just has that minor edge because Michael Pratt just hasn't shown enough where I think another team would threaten to scoop him up if he were available.
See, I think they'd be more likely to try to scoop up Pratt than Clifford. So that was sort of part of my thinking as to why, Pratt's the rookie. People think they can develop him and bring him along, where, Clifford has already got 1 year under his belt. And I think his lack of arm strength would cause a lot of teams to shy away.
Hey, he had a perfect 100% completion percentage as a rookie. So you never know. Maybe he would get scooped up, but hey, that's why we're here. We're not in the front offices. It'd be great to be a fly on the wall and know what they're thinking. But there you have it, though, where Gil thinks it's going to be Jordan Love and Michael Pratt. I think it's going to be Jordan Love and Sean Clifford, with the caveat that it could be a different quarterback eventually. But the initial 53-man, I think it's going to be Sean Clifford. Gil, how about the running back position? Who do you got making the 53-man?
Well, see, this is tricky. Josh Jacobs is a gimme at this point. But now you have A.J. Dillon and Marshawn Lloyd both dealing with injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that means Emmanuel Wilson gets a spot. And I think whichever one of those two guys is healthier will get the third spot, and they'll try to stash the other player on IR. We still don't have an evaluation on Dillon as far as his stinger and how serious it is and what the situation is going to be. So tentatively, I said Dillon will get one of the three running back spots, and they'll put Marshawn Lloyd on IR to start the season. But if, the injury to Lloyd heels and Dylan's stinger is a little bit more long-term, I could see them being flip-flopped.
And I'm with you on who I think is going to make the initial 53. I think it's going to be obviously Josh Jacobs, A.J. Dillon, and Emmanuel Wilson. The Packers did release Jarvian Howard earlier this week, and they brought back old friend Henry Pearson as a fullback, a guy who's probably going to be on the practice squad, I would think, most likely, his role with the Packers. And I'm with you, though, where Marshawn Lloyd would make this 53-man roster, but he's dealing with a hamstring. It's a soft tissue injury. You don't want to bring him back too soon. I think he starts the season on IR, Gil. So I agree with you there on the running back spot. But how about receiver? Obviously, the Packers are loaded and deep at the wide receiver spot. Who do you have making the initial 53-man roster out of this receiving group?
Well, I think you have 4 locks. You have Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks. Those guys are definitely making the roster, barring an injury that, puts them on IR. Then you have, in my mind, 3 guys going for 2 spots. Bo Melton, Malik Heath, Grant Dubose. I think that Melton and Dubose end up making the roster. I think they'll try to put Malik Heath on practice squad if nobody else picks him up. But it's going to go down to the wire between, 2 of these 3 guys that I mentioned are going to make it. For now, I have it as Melton and Dubose. How about you?
Grant Dubose has had such an awesome preseason and training camp that you cannot try to hide that guy in the practice squad.
I agree.
I feel like the Packers need to put him on the initial 53-man roster, where last year we didn't see him in the preseason. He was dealing with injuries. We didn't really see him in training camp either. And this guy's talented. They got to put him on the 53-man roster. So I think all those guys, and I think Malik Heath makes the team. I think they're keeping 7 wide receivers. They've done it before. It's not very common, but they've done this before where they've kept this many receivers. It's a deep freaking group, Gil. And I feel like Malik Heath, what he has shown, what he could do at the professional level, what he was able to do last year in limited time was really promising. The guy's an absolute dog on special teams, and as a blocker on the perimeter, I love the intensity he brings. Bo Melton obviously was an amazing story. He hasn't had the greatest showing in preseason this year, but he's a guy where I think teams would be like, oh, the Packers let him go. We're going to go get him because we know what he can do when the lights shine the brightest. He's a good player. He's a primetime player. And I think Bo Melton definitely makes this team again. But again, Dubose, he's a guy who has to make the team. And Samori Toure is probably going to be the odd man out in this group. Who knows if he's going to get scooped up by another team. I can't imagine if they keep 7 receivers, they'd have 1 on the practice squad. But Toure could be a good practice squad candidate too.
I could see them still stashing 1 on the practice squad, even if they keep 7, but we'll see. And I would love for all 7 of them to make the roster. But, I think about our next position, to me, is where you may be able to cut 1 player off of my list in order to keep 7 receivers. But it's not what I think the Packers will do, but maybe what they should do.
Yeah, and Gil, your tight ends. You tell us. I mean, obviously Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft are locks. Those guys are good players. We saw what they could do last year. Those 2 together should be an excellent dynamic duo at the tight end spot. But outside of that, who else makes the team in your prediction?
Again, I have 3 guys going for 2 spots, and that is the veteran Tyler Davis, who missed all of last year due to injury, Ben Sims, who stepped up and became the third tight end, and then Joel Wilson, who has just been so productive in practice and in preseason games. As of right now, I think they should go with Sims and Wilson, but I just think that Rich Bisaccia and Matt LaFleur just love Tyler Davis a lot more than I do. So I think they're going with Davis and Sims.
And you know what? It's funny. I almost had this identical. I was going back and forth between that 4th tight end spot. I'm with you on obviously Musgrave, Kraft, and Sims. But that 4th tight end spot, I think it's going to be Joel Wilson. And I think Joel Wilson shows upside. I like what he brings to the tight end spot. I like the depth he brings. Tyler Davis, too. It's, the guy's coming off an ACL tear, and he's dealing with a shoulder issue right now. It's another potential IR candidate to open the season. You don't know if he's fully healthy. It sounds like he's been full go of practice, but he's dealing with a shoulder issue now. And it's a matter of, do the Packers pick a guy who they know they can count on, or do they pick a guy that they know may have some upside to him? And I feel like they're going to go with Joel Wilson in this spot where they have the talent in Musgrave and Kraft. you might as well just see what Joel Wilson has. And I'm afraid he's going to get scooped up by another team. That's a big thing. I think Joel Wilson would get scooped up faster than a Tyler Davis would if they hit the
I
open
think he
market.
would too. And I think the key for Joel Wilson then becomes, can he contribute on special teams? Because that's why Tyler Davis sticks on the roster, if he sticks on the roster.
Now let's move to the big uglies, the offensive line in the trenches, the O-line, Gil. Who do you have making the team? I think we both have 9 guys making the Packers' initial 53-man roster on the O-line.
Yeah, so I go with Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Jordan Morgan, and Zach Tom. Those are my starters. Sean Ryan, to me, is sort of the swing interior lineman. Then I go with Jacob Monk, Travis Glover, and Kadeem Telford.
And I was almost identical with you. I was very close. I had 8 of 9 matching up with you. Obviously, with Jenkins, Tom, Walker, Myers, Morgan, Ryan, the rookies, Monk, and Glover. That final spot was interesting where Kadeem Telford's gotten some good looks. Caleb Jones, obviously, he's been in the lab for quite a bit for the Packers. Luke Tenuta is a guy who they like, who they had on IR all last year. But then Andre Dillard comes in. He had a rough start to camp, but I think Andre Dillard's going to get that edge. I think they're going to want at least one veteran, a guy with some experience on that initial 53-man roster. I feel like Telford, one of Telford, Jones, Tenuta, even maybe 2 of them, they could probably stash on the practice squad. I feel like Andre Dillard, he's kind of turned a corner. He's been there. He's done that. He's been in the fold quite a bit. He's going into his 6th NFL season. I feel like he's got the edge right now for that final spot for O-line depth.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think he would be the next candidate. I think his experience may be the difference if he does indeed win out.
Now, Gil, you and I think we're going to be pretty identical coming up on the D-line. At D-tackle specifically, we both had Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, Carl Brooks, and Colby Wooden making the team. I don't think there's a lot of debate here.
No, I think that's straightforward. Maybe there's a way they keep Jonathan Ford if they want to have an extra guy who can stop the run, but I think they'll be able to stash him on the practice squad if they want to go that route.
I agree. I think Jonathan Ford would make a lot of sense on the practice squad. I can't see him getting scooped up by another team, but who knows? Packers, on paper, they look pretty good at D-tackle. At defensive end, you and I are pretty identical with Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Kingsley Enagbare, Luke Van Ness, and Brent Cox Jr. But I will say that 5th spot, I think Cox Jr. makes the roster again, but Aaron Mosby's had a really good camp. And Keyshawn Banks is a guy who would get elevated from the practice squad last year in favor of Brenton Cox Jr. when they were dealing with injuries at that edge position a season ago, where maybe those guys get that final spot over Cox.
It's possible, but Cox looked pretty good last week against Denver. Again, one of the few players who had a highlight, let alone, anything else. But I still think the potential that Cox exhibited will be enough for him to make the roster.
Now moving to linebacker. Again, you and I thinking on the same wavelength, Gil. Quay Walker, Edrin Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie, Tyron Hopper, and Eric Wilson we think are going to make the team. It's going to be interesting. If Edrin Cooper isn't fully healed, maybe that's a sneaky IR candidate as well for the Packers. He has not been available in training camp and preseason at all this month. Eric Wilson is a guy who I really like everything he always brings to the table, but Christian Welch is also a pretty nice special teams player, and he showed some good things in that preseason blowout loss in Denver on Sunday. So this is a position group that could kind of change a little bit depending on logistics and how everything else works out with the rest of the roster.
Yeah, and how some of these guys perform in the final preseason game. That, to me, is something I'm going to be watching on Saturday, because a really strong performance by a Welch or a Wilson or, one of those guys could be the difference between making the roster, trying to get them on the practice squad, or losing them altogether if you can't stash them on the practice squad.
I would think Christian Welch, that'd be a guy it'd be easier for the Packers to put on the practice squad over an Eric Wilson or Isaiah McDuffie's making the team. Isaiah, he's the 3rd linebacker if Edrin Cooper is healthy, but right now he's the number 2 linebacker, so you need him. But moving on to the defensive secondary at corner, Gil, you and I are thinking the same again here. Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, Corey Ballantyne, and rookie Kalen King. Some other guys like Robert Rochelle, we don't have making the roster, but he seems like a guy who's going to make it onto the practice squad most likely and stick around in Green Bay.
And I get the feeling, and, I don't wish injuries on anyone, but you get the feeling that if he sticks, he's going to be elevated at least 3 times and may end up on the roster if anybody gets hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And a guy who he could beat out possibly for a job with Rochelle could be Corey Ballantyne or Kalen King, but the Packers love their draft picks. Kalen King was a first-round talent a couple of years ago before he dropped all the way to one of the final picks in this past draft. Corey Ballantyne showed way too many good things last year in really in help duty. And just like it was a position that got so thinned out because of injury and other issues with the team. And Corey Ballantyne balled out. So he's got a spot on this roster for sure, in my opinion. The safety group, Gil, this is the only position group on defense where we kind of have our differences.
Okay.
So you have your safety group, which is Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, Anthony Johnson Jr., and Ketan Oladapo.
Right.
And me, I think Oladapo is going to go to the IR. I don't think he's fully healthy. He has dealt with injuries. He was a medical red flag coming out of the draft last year, and he's kind of the perfect candidate for the Packers to stash on the IR and develop behind the scenes and get stronger behind the scenes because the guy has talent, but you have young guys like Javon Bullard and Evan Williams who we want to see play. Anthony Johnson Jr. has had a pretty good camp in preseason. Obviously, you know what you got with Xavier McKinney. I think Oladapo, that could be a sneaky area where they just slide him in on IR and they just kind of develop him behind the scenes.
Here's the only problem I have with that, and I think it makes sense on one level, but here's where I have a question. We know that we may see three safeties on the field in a lot of different formations, especially if they play Bullard in the slot. If you only have 4 safeties on your roster and you have 3 safety formations out there a large percentage of the time, you're kind of hamstringing yourself a little bit. There's not enough depth on the roster. Now, you can always activate someone in advance from the practice squad, elevate them for a game, but you're a little bit thin, I think, at safety if you only keep 4. I think your logic is sound except for that one fact.
Yeah, and that's obviously this feels like a situation where essentially you're going to have coaches banging on the table for why this guy should be on the roster and why this guy should not be why this guy should be on the roster. And I feel like that final roster spot could very well come down to a 7th receiver or a 5th safety. And the health is going to be very, very critical. It's going to be very critical for the Packers and what they do. I believe it's 2 guys. If they put 2 guys on the IR following training camp, I believe there's 2 guys they can activate after 4 games, and that's it.
Right.
So Marshawn Lloyd's going to be one of those. I think that's all but a guarantee with the hamstring injury and everything like that. Just look at Christian Watson last year when he dealt with his hamstring issue. He wasn't really back on the field until game 4, and even then he wasn't at full strength, where that just seems like it's going to be a prime spot for Marshawn Lloyd. And that other spot, it could be Ketan Oladapo just because of the injury history. It's going to be an interesting dynamic. And obviously, that's going to be some tough decisions in that war room coming up this weekend.
For sure. And again, how these guys do on Saturday could be sort of the thing that tilts the scale in one direction or another.
Now, the specialists, Gil, you and I are both on point. We think the punter is going to be Daniel Whelan. The long snapper is going to be Matt Orzech. And the kicker, we think Anders Carlson is going to survive, and he's going to be the kicker for the 2nd straight season in Green Bay.
I think he is on the initial 53, but if he's not doing well and someone interesting comes across the waiver wire at the end of cut down day, it would not surprise me for the Packers to sign somebody, whether they let go of Carlson or stash him or the new kicker on the practice squad. I don't know that his position is etched in stone, even if he does make the initial 53.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And Matthew Tan joining us in on the chat. Appreciate you, Matthew. Any fantasy football advice? Well, the Packers have scored a lot of points. You hope Anders Carlson gets a lot of points, but I wouldn't put my faith in him. And it's like they're going to be sharing the love on offense and everything like that. We're not a fantasy football show, but I'll tell you, if I'm picking fantasy, maybe the 2 guys at offense I pick are Jordan Love and Josh Jacobs. Too much love at receiver, too much spreading around the ball. And the Packers defense, hey, man, I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive. So maybe go for that.
Matthew, one thing I'm going to say, late rounds of the draft, Romeo Doubs. He's going to be a red zone target. If you could pick him up in the last 2 or 3 rounds of your draft, it would be a great value.
And Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson are both deep ball threats. Jaden Reed is a great PPR threat. I'm just saying, man, there's that you can't go one way or another. It's gonna be a lot of fun in Green Bay. And if the Packers are winning a lot of games, fantasy football is gonna be very good for Packer fans. He said he's got Romeo Doubs and Josh Jacobs, so hey, he's taking our advice already. But what do you know? But Gil, before we wrap up with some trivia, what articles do you have coming up on Cheesehead TV and the Packers Post?
Well, on Cheesehead, I took a look at the way injuries are affecting the running back room, and we touched on it a little bit. But with A.J. Dillon and Marshawn Lloyd hurt, you got a little bit of a questionable situation there, and how the Packers handle it will be interesting. As far as the Packers Post, I'm talking a little bit more about the kicking battle, and Alex Hale. So we got a little bit more about that. And Matthew, as far as the Packers defense, yeah, I think it would be a good value also, later on in the draft. I don't think they're going to be taken right away, but I think you can do well with that defense.
Jeff Hafley wants to be aggressive. Usually that's a very good thing for a defense. They're going to feast quite a bit, hopefully in the turnover game and everything like that. But I also want to mention too, Gil, neither of us had an undrafted rookie free agent making this Packers initial 53-man roster. I think Donovan Jennings would have been the candidate, but he's been hurt this whole year. I think that's a guy who lands on IR, but maybe out the whole year, a guy they develop behind the scenes. So I don't know if that would essentially mean that the streak continues for the Packers, but I don't think that actually counts necessarily. So
I don't think so either.
But yeah, we'll see what happens. It's going to be very interesting. We'll talk about the whole initial 53-man roster next week. But first, Gil, you ready for some trivia?
Always ready. Let's go for it.
All right. Well, in case you didn't hear, the Baltimore Ravens arrived in Green Bay a few days in advance of their preseason finale for joint practice. It was also a reunion for Packers All-Pro cornerback Jair Alexander and Ravens MVP quarterback Lamar Jackson. They were teammates in college at Louisville. It was also a reunion for one former Packer who is currently a member of the Ravens. Gil, name the former Packer who is currently a Baltimore Raven today.
Offense or defense?
Defense.
Defense. Is it Zadarius Smith?
No, Zadarius. So he used to be a Baltimore Raven. He's with the Browns right now. So it's a guy who he's a fringe. He may or may not make the roster. He was a late round pick in 2019.
A late round pick in 2019.
Yep, and he's in the secondary. Did not play many games in Green Bay, but he played in Green Bay.
Okay, let's see.
Dig deep, Gil. Dig deep. Anyone out there watching on Facebook and YouTube, chime in if you know the answer.
And he went to Louisville.
He did not go to Louisville. He played for the Packers.
Oh, okay.
And now he's on the Baltimore Ravens roster. So it's a reunion of a Raven rejoining his old Packer teammates and old Packer coaches.
Vernon Scott.
It is not Vernon Scott. Very good guess, but it's cornerback Kadar Hallman. The Packers drafted Hallman in the 6th round of the 2019 draft. He appeared in 18 games, started one game in his 2 years with the Packers from 2019 through 2020, registered 10 total tackles, defended 3 passes. Packers traded Hallman to the Houston Texans prior to the start of the 2021 season. He bounced around numerous practice squads before rejoining the reigning AFC South champion Texans last year, and he appeared in all 17 games, primarily on special teams in Houston a season ago. So there you have it, Kadar Hallman. I know that was not an easy one. That was I was just like, hey, the Ravens are in town. Let's see which former Packers there, and he was there from the beginning of the Matt LaFleur era. So you hope that he got some good daps and some good hand. Hopefully it was a good reunion for Kadar Hallman and the Packers.
Yeah, and better for the Packers than Kadar. I liked Kadar Hallman. I would like to see him make the team, but we'll see what happens with that. Not an easy situation for those fringe guys. Once you get past year 2, it's a little tougher because there's always new guys coming in to take those roster spots.
Someone's always ready to take your job, Gil. So it's we're gonna be talking about that all next week and looking forward to it. And we're getting closer to that first game in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I cannot wait.
No, I am very excited about that, and it is going to be pretty darn Packer football, real football, coming back. I am very, very excited.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is it for today. We'll be right back here next week. Follow us on Twitter at Gil Packers and at GB Packers Sean to stay up to date on all things Packers or to ask us questions. Or you can email us at gbpackersean@gmail.com. Make sure you're subscribed to Packers Talk on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And a big thanks to PackersTalk.com for powering our show. Thank you for listening. Until next time, go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.